His dreams of freedom, of seeing the world beyond the village, seemed to crumble before his eyes. But he knew he could not argue. The elders had spoken, and in this village their word was law. He could barely speak as the men turned and left, their cloaks swaying behind them like shadows. For the rest of the day, Tomas wandered the village, trying to calm himself. He went to the river, hoping that the flowing water might soothe him, but even the gentle sound of the current felt oppressive. Everyone he passed looked at him differently, some with curiosity, others with pity. Rumors must have already spread. Whispers followed him wherever he went. He could hear fragments of conversations as he walked past the baker or the blacksmith across the street. He must marry her today. Poor boy, how could they force him? Tomas felt trapped. He had never felt so powerless in his life. He thought of the life he wanted, one filled with laughter, friends, and freedom. Now that life seemed impossible. The thought of Marla filled him with dread. What kind of woman was she? Would she be cruel, vengeful, or angry at being forced into marriage herself? How could he ever be happy with someone the village feared and shunned? That evening, Thomas sat alone in the blacksmith workshop, the fire from the forge glowing softly and casting long shadows on the walls. He tried to focus on his work, but the sound of hammering felt hollow. His hands shook as he held the iron, and he realized he could not escape the reality of what was coming. Marriage to Marla was no longer a distant thought. It was inevitable. As night fell, Tomas finally allowed himself to think about Marla not as the witch the village made her out to be, but as a real person. He had no idea what she was like, no idea if she laughed or cried or had dreams of her own. The thought made him uneasy, but also slightly curious. Could she be different from what the villagers said? Could there be goodness in her, hidden behind the rumors and fear? Sleep came fitfully that night. Tomas dreamed of a dark forest, of being lost among shadows, and of a woman with kind eyes who reached out her hand. He woke in the early hours of the morning, heart racing, and realized that fear and uncertainty had taken hold of him. But beneath it all, a small part of him, a very small, almost guilty part, felt a strange sense of anticipation. Meeting Marla would change his life one way or another. The next morning, Tomas prepared himself. His clothes were clean, his hair combed, and he tried to steady his nerves. The village square was already filling with people, neighbors, friends, and elders, all gathered to witness the wedding. Children ran around unaware of the tension that gripped the adults, and the air was crisp and bright, filled with the scent of freshly baked bread from the nearby bakery. When Marla appeared, Thomas froze again. She moved with a quiet grace, her dark hair falling around her shoulders, her eyes calm but intense. She did not look like the stories had described. She did not seem cruel or vengeful. She was simply there, standing in the morning light, waiting for him. And in that moment, Tomas realized that the world he had imagined, full of fear and expectation, might not be the reality at all. As they were led to the small chapel at the edge of the village, Tomas's mind was a storm of emotions. Fear, resentment, curiosity, and something he could not yet name. He knew that this day would mark a turning point in his life. He did not yet know how or if he would ever find happiness. But he did know that everything he had believed about Marla, about himself, and about the life he thought he would lead, was about to be challenged in ways he could never imagine. Tomas's story, he realized, was no longer his own. It belonged now to both him and Marla, to the future they would face together, and to the village that had set the stage for a life neither of them could have foreseen. Marla's life had been unlike anyone else's in the village. From a young age, people had treated her differently, as if she were somehow dangerous or unworthy of friendship. Children would run away when she approached, and even adults whispered behind her back. Some villagers claimed she could see things others could not, or that she had powers to bring misfortune. Most of these stories were exaggerations passed down from neighbor to neighbor, but the fear they inspired was very real. Despite the rumors, Marla had grown into a patient, kind-hearted woman. She lived in a small cottage at the edge of the forest, surrounded by herbs, flowers, and small animals that seemed to trust her immediately. Her life was quiet, simple, and often lonely, but she had found comfort in the small joys others overlooked. She loved tending her garden, watching the seasons change, and listening to the birds sing in the morning. She had learned from her mother how to make remedies from herbs, how to help those who were sick, and how to live peacefully without needing the approval of others. When Marla heard that she would be married to Tomas, she felt a mixture of emotions. She had not expected this, and part of her worried about how the young blacksmith would react to her. Would he fear her? Would he hate her? But another part of her, a quiet, hopeful part, wondered if perhaps he could see her as she truly was. Not as a witch, not as an outcast, but as a person. She dressed carefully for the wedding, choosing simple clothes of soft fabric that allowed her to move freely, yet still made her feel presentable. She braided her hair neatly, though some strands would always escape, curling around her face. The morning of the wedding was tense. Marla had spent hours preparing not just her appearance, but also calming her own nerves. She walked to the village square with measured steps, aware of the curious eyes upon her. Children peeked from behind fences, villagers whispered in low tones, and the elders watched with satisfied expressions, as if a balance had finally been restored. Despite the attention, Marla held her head high, refusing to let fear or judgment control her. When she saw Tomas waiting for her, she felt a flicker of nervousness. He looked tense, his eyes wide with uncertainty. She could see that he had been told all the stories about her, and that some part of him might already fear her. But she also noticed a strange curiosity in him, a small, unspoken question. Who is this woman, really? She decided then that she would let her actions speak before her reputation ever could. The ceremony itself was simple. The chapel was small, made of old stone and filled with the soft morning light streaming through the windows. A few villagers had gathered, though many had stayed away, unwilling to witness what they believed was an unusual union. Marla and Tomas stood together, and the elder recited words Tomas barely heard, his mind wandering with worry and anticipation. He felt Marla's hand brush his for the first time, and though he tensed at the contact, he felt a surprising warmth. She didn't squeeze, she didn't pull away, she simply held it gently, as if to say, "We will face this together." After the ceremony, the couple was expected to spend time together in the small home that had been prepared for them. Tomas walked beside Marla, still unsure how to behave. Did he speak to her? Should he remain silent? Every step felt awkward, heavy with unspoken expectations. Marla, on the other hand, moved with calm confidence, letting him take the lead but never shying away from walking beside him. She knew that trust and patience would be the foundation of whatever life they could build together. As they entered their home, Tomas could not help but notice the small details. Herbs hung from the rafters, jars of dried flowers lined the shelves, and a small fire burned in the hearth. The air smelled faintly of lavender and dried mint, calming in a way he had not expected. Marla gestured for him to sit while she prepared tea, and for the first time since the elders had announced the marriage, Tomas felt a spark of relief. Perhaps she was not as frightening as he had imagined. Over the next few weeks, Tomas began to see Marla's true nature. She was patient, gentle, and always considerate of his feelings. She never forced him to speak or act in a certain way, but she always showed kindness and respect. She tended the home meticulously, prepared meals with care, and spent her days tending the small garden and helping the few villagers brave enough to visit her. Thomas struggled at first with his own prejudices. He had been raised on the stories of witches and misfortune, and those ideas did not disappear overnight. Sometimes he would catch himself staring at Marla, expecting something strange or frightening to happen. But each day he was surprised to find nothing unusual, only the quiet rhythm of her life and the warmth of her actions. She laughed when the children dared to approach her garden, and she spoke kindly to the elderly villagers who sought her remedies. Tomas realized slowly that the witch was simply a woman with knowledge, courage, and a good heart, and that the fear surrounding her was the village's, not hers. One afternoon, while Tomas worked in the blacksmith shop, Marla brought him a small tray of food and placed it gently on the workbench. He looked up, startled, and saw her smile. "Eat," she said simply. "You've been at it all morning. Don't let the work take everything from you." He hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Why are you being so kind?" he asked, almost in disbelief. Marla's eyes softened. "Because kindness costs nothing, and it can mean everything," she said. "I do not ask for love or approval. I only want to do what is right and help where I can." Thomas was struck by her words. They were simple, yet they carried a weight he had not expected. She did not ask for praise or admiration. She did not demand respect. She simply lived in a way that was true to herself, no matter what the village thought. As the weeks turned into months, Tomas began to learn more about Marla. She taught him about the plants in her garden, how to make teas and remedies, and how to listen carefully to the needs of others. He found himself growing fascinated by her knowledge and patience. The fear he had once felt began to melt, replaced by curiosity and eventually respect. One day, a small child came to Marla, crying because her mother had been too busy to care for her. Marla knelt down, holding the child gently, and soothed her with calm words and a soft smile. Thomas watched from a distance, and something in him shifted. The kindness in her actions was undeniable, and the child's relief and joy reflected the truth of who Marla really was. It was in that moment that Tomas began to understand that the heart of a person could not be judged by rumors or fear, but life was not without its challenges. Some villagers continued to avoid them, whispering behind their backs. Some delivered harsh words in passing, reminding Tomas of the gossip he had heard long before the wedding. It was difficult not to let these judgments affect him. Yet every time he saw Marla act with patience, compassion, or quiet strength, he felt a small but growing sense of admiration. He realized that love and trust were not something forced or demanded. They were earned, slowly and carefully, through actions that proved character and heart. Evenings became a time of learning and reflection. Tomas and Marla would sit by the fire, talking about their lives, their dreams, and their fears. Marla never judged him for his mistakes, and Tomas never scolded her for her quiet ways. They began to share small joys. A story, a laugh, the smell of fresh bread from the oven, the feel of a cool breeze on the porch. Each day Tomas discovered more about her, and each day he found himself wondering if perhaps he had been wrong about so many things. For the first time since the elders forced him into marriage, Tomas felt a flicker of hope. He did not yet know what the future held, and he still worried about the judgment of the village. But he began to believe that perhaps happiness could exist even in unexpected places. Perhaps love could grow where fear once lived. And perhaps, just perhaps, the woman he had been forced to marry could become someone he admired, trusted, and even cared for deeply. In the quiet moments when the village slept and only the wind moved through the trees, Tomas would watch Marla as she worked or tended the garden. He saw her patience with animals, her gentle touch with children, her unwavering kindness toward strangers, and in those moments he realized that the woman known as the witch was not only human, but remarkable in ways the village had never understood. She had survived fear, isolation, and suspicion, and yet she had never let bitterness take hold. She had remained true to herself, and in doing so, she was teaching Tomas something he had never known, that real courage and real goodness often exist where least expected. By the end of those months, the young blacksmith who had once feared and resented his forced marriage began to see the first signs of change in himself. He was learning to let go of the prejudices he had inherited, to see people for who they truly were, and to recognize that a heart like Marla's was rare and precious. He did not yet love her in the way one might imagine love, but he felt a deep respect and growing trust. And in that he found the first glimmers of hope that perhaps this marriage, forced as it had been, could lead to something extraordinary, something neither he nor Marla had expected, but that might just be the most real and meaningful life he could imagine. The first months of Tomas and Marla's marriage had been filled with quiet tension, small discoveries, and moments of unexpected warmth. Tomas was slowly learning to see Marla not as the witch the village feared, but as a human being with her own hopes, struggles, and kindness. Yet the world outside their small home continued to challenge him, testing both his patience and his growing admiration for Marla. The village had not yet fully accepted the marriage. Some people avoided them entirely, walking past the couple with quick steps, muttering under their breath. Others would deliver polite smiles that barely hid suspicion or disapproval. Even Tomas's closest friends hesitated to visit him, unsure how to treat the woman who had been the subject of so many whispered tales. It was difficult, Tomas realized, not to feel frustrated or angry. He sometimes wanted to shout at the villagers, to tell them that Marla was not dangerous, that she was kind and intelligent, and that their fear was unfounded. But he also knew that such words would fall on deaf ears. The village believed what it wanted to believe, and no argument could change that overnight. Marla, however, remained calm in the face of judgment. She never spoke ill of those who feared her, never lashed out at those who avoided her. Instead, she continued her quiet work, tending her garden, caring for the few villagers who sought her help, and keeping their home in order. She had a remarkable ability to focus on what truly mattered, ignoring the petty judgments of others. Tomas watched her with growing respect, sometimes astonished at the patience she could summon. How could someone face constant suspicion and still remain kind and gentle? He realized that strength could take many forms, and Marla's was one of quiet endurance. One morning, a group of children arrived at their home. They were curious, cautious, and a little frightened, but something in Marla's gentle demeanor encouraged them to stay. She knelt down, speaking softly and offering herbs she had grown in her garden. "This will help if your stomach hurts," she said, handing a small bundle to a girl with red hair and wide eyes. The child smiled tentatively and took the herbs. Tomas watched the scene unfold from the doorway. He could see the children relaxing in her presence, laughing at small jokes, and asking questions about the plants in her garden. Something inside him shifted again. The woman the village had called a witch was capable of bringing joy and comfort to those who needed it most. The rumors, the fear, and the whispers. All of it had been based on ignorance and superstition. Tomas began to feel shame for his own hesitations, realizing how unfair it had been to judge her before truly knowing her. As the weeks passed, Thomas started to notice small changes in himself. He found that he was listening more, observing more, and reacting less impulsively. He admired Marla's knowledge of herbs and remedies and began to learn from her, practicing carefully as she guided him. He learned which plants could soothe pain, which leaves could reduce fevers, and which teas brought calm to a troubled mind. With each lesson, Tomas felt a new sense of connection to her, not just as a wife, but as someone who had wisdom he did not yet possess. One afternoon, while Tomas was working in the blacksmith shop, Marla came to him with a worried expression. "A neighbor's child is sick," she said. "I think it would help if we visited and offered some remedies." Tomas nodded, a little unsure at first. He had never been involved in tending the sick, and the idea made him nervous. But Marla's calm assurance encouraged him. Together they walked to the neighbor's home, carrying herbs, teas, and ointments. The child was feverish, pale, and frightened. Tomas felt a pang of helplessness, unsure of what to do. Marla gently guided his hands, showing him how to prepare the tea, how to apply the ointment, and how to comfort the child without causing fear. Thomas followed her instructions carefully, and when the child finally relaxed and sipped the tea, he felt a sense of pride and relief unlike anything he had experienced before. He looked at Marla, and for the first time he saw not only her knowledge, but also her courage. She faced challenges without fear, offering help where others might have turned away. Life was not always easy, however. Some villagers continued to challenge them, spreading false stories and expressing doubt. One morning, Tomas overheard two men speaking harshly about Marla. "She cannot be trusted," one said. "She uses her herbs for dark purposes." Tomas's heart pounded. He wanted to defend her, to shout and argue, but he remembered her calm approach. Instead, he walked away quietly, letting their ignorance fade into the distance. He realized that defending her with anger would only reinforce the village's fear. Actions, he understood now, spoke louder than words. Evenings in their home became a time of reflection and quiet conversation. Thomas and Marla would sit by the fire, sharing stories about their childhoods, discussing their dreams, and talking about the small joys of the day. Marla never pressured him to speak, and Thomas never demanded explanations. They learned to listen, to understand, and to respect one another's experiences. These moments, simple and peaceful, strengthened their bond more than any grand gesture could. One particularly cold evening, a storm swept over the village. Rain lashed against the windows, and wind shook the trees. Tomas and Marla sat by the fire, listening to the storm's roar. Tomas had been feeling a mix of anxiety and wonder about the life he was building with Marla. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly, almost afraid of her answer. Marla looked at him calmly. "Regret what?" she asked. "Marrying me, all of this." He gestured broadly to the home, the garden, the village. He said, "Do you ever wish you could have lived differently?" Marla smiled faintly. "I do not believe in regret," she said. "I believe in what we do with the life we have. Choices are never perfect, and people are never flawless. What matters is how we treat each day and how we treat those around us." Thomas felt a warmth in her words, a wisdom that went beyond any lessons he had learned before. He realized that she had endured fear, isolation, and misunderstanding for most of her life, yet she had never allowed it to define her. That night, as the storm raged outside, Tomas felt the first real stirrings of admiration and trust for Marla. He was beginning to understand that love was not something that happened instantly. It was slow, careful, and built on respect, patience, and shared experiences. As months turned into seasons, Tomas and Marla faced challenges together. The village remained cautious, sometimes cold, sometimes judgmental. But with each act of kindness Marla offered, Tomas felt his own heart change. He no longer feared the whispers or the stares. He had seen the truth of her character, and that truth was more powerful than any rumor or superstition. One spring morning, as flowers began to bloom in Marla's garden, Tomas found himself helping her tend the plants. He noticed how she moved among them, her hands gentle but confident, her eyes careful and attentive. "Why do you care so much for these plants?" he asked. Marla looked at him with a smile. "Because life is fragile," she said simply. "Whether it is a plant, a child, or an adult, every life deserves care. Even when others do not see its value, I will try to." Madame Dell said him deeply. Her words struck him deeply. Tomas realized that her life, though marked by suspicion and loneliness, had been guided by a sense of purpose and compassion. She had chosen goodness even when the world had chosen fear. And in seeing her live this way, he felt a new understanding of what it meant to live fully, not in defiance, but in quiet strength. By the end of the first year of their marriage, Tomas felt a remarkable transformation within himself. He had moved from fear to curiosity, from curiosity to respect, and from respect to a deep, quiet trust. He had seen Marla face challenges, care for others, and remain true to her heart. And in watching her, he had learned something important about life, that true courage was not loud or boastful, but patient, persistent, and gentle. In moments of solitude, Tomas reflected on how far he had come. The man who had once feared his forced marriage now found joy in shared meals, in quiet conversations by the fire, and in small tasks completed together. He had begun to recognize the rare beauty in Marla's character, the purity of her intentions, and the depth of her kindness. Each day brought a new lesson, a new opportunity to see her in a light that no rumor could ever dim. And, though the village remained cautious, the whispers still drifted through the streets, Tomas no longer allowed them to control his perception. He had seen the truth. He had seen Marla, not the stories, not the fears, not the prejudice, and in that seeing he had found something he had never expected, the first stirrings of admiration, trust, and perhaps, one day, love. Life in the small village was never without challenges, and for Tomas and Marla, the next trial would come unexpectedly. It started one chilly autumn morning when the first signs of illness began appearing among the villagers. At first it was just a few coughs here and there, children missing school, and adults feeling unusually weak. But within days it became clear that something more serious was spreading through the town. People grew worried, and panic began to ripple through the streets. Thomas noticed the changes immediately. His father, usually strong and steady, came into the workshop looking pale and exhausted. "Tomas," he said quietly, "the illness is spreading faster than we thought. People are scared." Tomas's stomach tightened. He thought about the village, his neighbors, and the families he had grown up with. Fear was already in the air, and with the illness spreading, judgment and superstition were bound to follow. Marla, however, remained calm. She had seen illness before, had cared for people in need even when others had avoided them. "We must act quickly," she said to Tomas. "If we wait, more people will suffer. I have remedies that can help, but we need to work together." Her voice was steady, full of quiet confidence. Tomas felt a mixture of awe and reassurance. He had learned from her patience and knowledge, and now he would see her courage in action. They began their work immediately. Marla prepared herbal teas, ointments, and poultices, explaining each step to Tomas. She showed him how to mix herbs with water, how to ensure the strength of each remedy was safe, and how to administer care to the sick without causing panic. Tomas followed her instructions carefully, his hands trembling at first, but growing steadier as he watched her. Her confidence was contagious, and he felt himself becoming braver. Their first visit was to the home of a young mother whose child was very ill. The mother was frightened and hesitant, unsure whether to trust Marla. Tomas noticed the fear in her eyes and remembered the same fear he had felt when the elders first forced him into marriage. He placed a gentle hand on the mother's shoulder. "She will help," he said softly. "She knows what she is doing." Marla knelt beside the child, speaking in a calm, soothing voice. She applied a warm compress to the child's forehead, handed a cup of herbal tea, and stayed until the child drank and seemed a little more comfortable. Thomas watched, amazed. He had expected fear, resistance, or even anger. Instead, he saw trust growing, slowly but surely, through the simple acts of care that Marla offered. Over the following days, the sickness spread rapidly. More children, elders, and adults fell ill, and the village began to panic. Some villagers were suspicious of Marla, whispering that she had brought the illness herself. Others avoided her entirely, unwilling to seek help from the woman they still feared. Tomas, however, refused to let superstition dictate his actions. He stood by Marla, helping her visit homes, deliver remedies, and provide comfort. He felt a deep respect for her knowledge and bravery, and a growing sense of admiration for the woman he had once feared. It was not easy work. Long hours, constant movement, and the emotional toll of seeing suffering weighed heavily on both of them. Thomas often returned to their home exhausted, his body aching, and yet he felt a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. Marla would always be there to guide him, offering encouragement and gentle reassurance. "You are learning," she would say. "Patience and care are as important as knowledge. One particularly difficult day, a severe case brought them to the home of the village elder himself. He had fallen gravely ill, and many villagers whispered that it was too late to help him. Tomas felt a wave of fear. The elder had been stern and judgmental toward him in the past, and now he was depending on the very woman the village had shunned. Marla approached the elder with calm dignity, preparing remedies and administering care with careful precision. She spoke to him gently, explaining each step, and encouraging him to rest and drink the herbal teas she had prepared. Thomas watched, feeling a mixture of anxiety and admiration. The elder, known for his strictness, began to relax under Marla's care. He listened to her instructions, followed her advice, and slowly, over the course of several hours, his breathing became steadier, and the color returned to his cheeks. Tomas felt a profound sense of relief and pride. He realized that the village's fear of Marla was completely unfounded, and that her true strength lay in her ability to face challenges without fear or anger. As the illness began to subside, the villagers started to notice the efforts of Marla and Tomas. They saw the sick being cared for, the children recovering, and the elderly finding strength once again. Slowly, suspicion began to give way to gratitude. People who had once whispered behind her back now sought her advice, brought her small gifts, or simply offered a nod of respect. Tomas felt a sense of pride not only in Marla but in himself. He had stood by her, learned from her, and shared in her work. Together, they had made a difference. Throughout this trial, Thomas's feelings for Marla continued to grow. He admired her courage, her knowledge, and her unwavering kindness. He began to understand that love was not always immediate or passionate. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and rooted in respect and shared experiences. He had once feared being forced into this marriage, but now he realized that he had found someone remarkable, someone who taught him lessons he could not have learned elsewhere. Evenings after long days of helping the sick became a time for reflection and connection. Thomas and Marla would sit by the fire, discussing the day's events, sharing thoughts, and sometimes simply sitting in comfortable silence. Thomas felt a sense of closeness he had never known before. He could see the depth of Marla's heart, her strength, and her commitment to doing what was right, no matter the cost. He realized that the woman he had once dreaded marrying was the same woman who had taught him the true meaning of courage, compassion, and partnership. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Thomas asked Marla quietly, "Do you ever get tired of being judged by the village?" "Judgment is not my concern," she said gently. "I cannot control what others think. All I can do is act according to my heart and help where I can. That is enough for me." Tomas was struck by her wisdom. He realized that he had spent so much of his life worrying about the opinions of others, letting fear and doubt influence his actions. Marla, on the other hand, faced life with clarity and purpose. She had endured years of suspicion and isolation and had never let it harden her heart. Tomas understood that this was what made her truly extraordinary. As the months passed and the village slowly returned to normal, Tomas and Marla's bond grew stronger. They had faced fear, illness, and uncertainty together, and their shared experiences had created a foundation of trust and mutual respect. Tomas no longer saw Marla as the woman the village had feared. He saw her as someone with the purest heart he had ever encountered. He admired her for her courage, her wisdom, and her unwavering kindness, and he felt a growing sense of gratitude for being able to share his life with her. Through this trial, Tomas learned an important lesson. True strength and goodness are not always visible to the world. They are often quiet, steady, and revealed through actions rather than words. Marla had shown him that courage could be gentle, that love could be patient, and that the heart's purity was more valuable than any reputation or title. By the time winter approached, Thomas felt a profound sense of change within himself. He had started this marriage with fear and resentment, but he now understood that he had been given something rare and precious. He had found not only a partner, but a teacher, a guide, and a source of inspiration. The village might have forced the union, but the life he was building with Marla was becoming something far greater than he could have imagined. In the quiet moments, Thomas often reflected on the journey they had shared. From the first awkward days of their forced marriage to the long hours spent helping the sick, he saw a pattern of growth, understanding, and connection. Marla had taught him to see beyond fear, to act with compassion, and to trust in the goodness of others. And through it all, Tomas realized that he had begun to love her. Not in the way he had imagined as a young man dreaming of adventure, but in a deeper, steadier way, rooted in respect, admiration. As winter snow began to blanket the village, Tomas stood by the window of their home, watching the flakes fall softly to the ground. He felt a warmth in his heart that had nothing to do with the fire inside. He thought of Marla, tending her garden, caring for the sick, and offering comfort to all who needed it. He realized that the woman who had once seemed frightening, mysterious, and distant had become the center of his world. She was not only his wife, but the embodiment of patience, courage, and kindness. And in that quiet, snowy moment, Thomas understood something he had never known before. Love could grow even in the most unexpected circumstances, even when fear and judgment surrounded it. True goodness, he realized, was not measured by what others thought, but by the quiet actions of the heart. Marla had shown him this truth, and in doing so, she had changed his life forever. The seasons had changed again, and winter had given way to spring. The village, once tense and filled with suspicion, was slowly becoming a place of quiet renewal. Flowers bloomed along the cobblestone streets, the river sparkled in the sunlight, and the trees that had once been bare now wore a coat of fresh green. For Tomas and Marla, life had grown into a rhythm of work, care, and companionship. Their home, once the center of whispered rumors, had become a place of warmth and quiet joy. Thomas often reflected on how far they had come. When he first met Marla, he had been afraid, reluctant, and confused. He had seen her through the lens of the village's fear and superstition, imagining her to be something she was not. But time, shared experiences, and Marla's unwavering kindness had changed everything. He had learned to see her for who she truly was, patient, courageous, and filled with a heart so pure that it could touch even the most skeptical or fearful soul. It was during one of these quiet spring mornings that Tomas realized just how deeply he had come to care for her. They were tending to the small garden behind their home, planting herbs and flowers for the coming months. Marla worked with gentle care, her hands moving skillfully through the soil, while Tomas assisted, following her instructions and marveling at the precision with which she worked. "You know," Tomas said softly, "I never imagined a life like this." Marla looked up from her work, her eyes calm but curious. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this life," Tomas said, gesturing around them. "The work, the quiet days, the care we give to others. I thought marriage would be something different. I thought it would be stressful, awkward, maybe even unpleasant. But now I see that I have learned so much, and it is because of you." Marla smiled faintly, a warmth in her eyes. "It is because of us," she said. "We have shared these experiences together. You have learned, just as I have, that life is about patience, kindness, and understanding. Love is built slowly, day by day, through our actions and choices." Tomas paused, thinking about her words. He realized that Marla's life had always been guided by this understanding, even before he had come into it. She had faced suspicion, fear, and isolation for years, yet she had never let it harden her heart. She had always acted according to what she believed was right, and in doing so, she had taught him the most important lessons of his life. Over the following months, Tomas and Marla continued to grow closer, not through grand gestures or declarations of love, but through the simple, meaningful moments of daily life. They would sit together in the evenings by the fire, sharing stories, planning the garden, or discussing the needs of the villagers. Sometimes they would simply sit in silence, appreciating each other's presence, knowing that the bond they were building was strong and enduring. The villagers, too, were beginning to see the truth. The rumors and whispers that had once surrounded Marla were slowly fading. People who had once avoided her now approached with small gifts or words of thanks. Children who had been afraid now played in her garden, learning about the herbs and flowers under her gentle guidance. Even the elders, who had once been strict and judgmental, began to acknowledge her wisdom and the value of her contributions to the village. Tomas observed these changes with a sense of pride and relief. He knew that Marla had always been the same person, and it was the villagers' perception that had changed. He had learned an important lesson: that true goodness does not seek recognition, but recognition often follows genuine acts of kindness and courage. Marla had lived this lesson every day, and he had been fortunate enough to witness it firsthand. One day, a young girl from the village approached their home, carrying a small bundle of flowers. She handed it to Marla with a shy smile. "For you," she said. "Thank you for helping my mother." Marla accepted the flowers with a gentle nod and smiled at the child. "Thank you," she said softly. "Remember, kindness is always returned in ways we may not see." Thomas watched the exchange, feeling a swell of admiration. Marla's heart was open, generous, and unafraid. She had transformed fear into trust, suspicion into respect, and isolation into connection. And through it all, Tomas realized that he had been changed as well. He had learned patience, courage, and compassion simply by sharing life with her. As spring turned to summer, Tomas reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the day the elders had forced him into marriage, the fear and resentment he had felt, and the doubts that had filled his heart. He had expected hardship, conflict, and perhaps even unhappiness. But what he had found instead was something far more valuable: a partner, a teacher, and a friend whose heart was pure, unwavering, and true. One warm summer evening, Tomas and Marla sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset behind the hills. The sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and gold, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers. Tomas took Marla's hand gently in his. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset and the calm confidence that he had come to admire so deeply. "Marla," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something. I know I may have been wrong in the beginning. I feared this marriage, and I doubted what we could have together. But now I see the truth. You have shown me what courage, patience, and kindness truly mean. You have taught me lessons I could not have learned anywhere else, and I believe I have found the purest heart I will ever know. I am grateful to share my life with you." Marla's eyes softened and she smiled. "Tomas," she said, "love is not always easy or immediate. It is built through shared experiences, trust, and understanding. You have learned to see me, to respect me, and to care for others alongside me. That is the foundation of love. And I have seen the same in you. You have grown not only in skill and knowledge, but in heart. You are a partner in every sense, and that is all that matters." Thomas felt a warmth spread through his chest, a sense of peace he had never known before. He realized that love, respect, and admiration could coexist, and that the journey they had taken together had brought them to a place of mutual understanding and trust. He no longer saw Marla as the woman the village had feared. He saw her as someone remarkable, whose heart had the power to change lives, including his own. In the weeks and months that followed, Thomas and Marla continued to build their life together. They worked in the garden, helped the villagers, and nurtured the small community around them. Their home became a place of warmth, learning, and comfort, where people could come for advice, remedies, or simply a kind word. Thomas often marveled at how far they had come, from the day he had been forced into marriage to this life filled with connection, purpose, and love. The village had changed as well. Fear and suspicion had given way to trust and respect. People who had once avoided Marla now sought her guidance. Children played in the garden, learning from her and Tomas. Elders nodded in acknowledgement of their work, and neighbors offered small acts of kindness that reflected the growing acceptance of the couple. Thomas felt proud, not because of any recognition he sought, but because he had witnessed the transformation that comes from patience, courage, and unwavering goodness. One evening, as the sun set and the village grew quiet, Thomas and Marla sat together watching the stars appear, one by one. He thought of all the lessons he had learned, that fear could be replaced by understanding, that respect could grow even in the hardest circumstances, and that love could flourish where patience, kindness, and trust existed. Marla leaned her head on his shoulder, and Tomas felt a sense of completeness he had never known. He realized that the woman he had once feared, the woman the village had called a witch, had become the center of his world. She had shown him the true meaning of courage, the power of patience, and the depth of a heart untainted by fear or prejudice. In that quiet moment, Thomas understood something fundamental. Life's greatest lessons often come in unexpected forms, and the purest hearts are not always recognized at first. Sometimes they must be discovered through time, patience, and shared experiences. And Thomas had discovered one such heart, Marla's. As they sat together under the starlit sky, Thomas felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had been forced into a marriage he did not want, but in the process he had found something far greater than he could have imagined. Love rooted in respect, trust, and shared life. A heart so pure that it had transformed him, guided him, and inspired him. He squeezed Marla's hand gently, feeling the warmth and strength that had carried them through months of fear, challenge, and discovery. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." Marla smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the quiet light of the stars. "We have done this together," she said, "and together we will continue to face whatever comes our way. That is the life we have chosen, and that is the heart that guides us." Thomas leaned back, watching the stars and feeling a peace he had never known before. He realized that he had found something rare and beautiful, a heart that could withstand fear, judgment, and misunderstanding. And in that heart, he had found the truest reflection of goodness, courage, and love. From that day forward, Tomas no longer thought of Marla as the woman the village feared. He saw her as the heart of their home, the soul of their shared life, and the embodiment of all the lessons he had learned. And in that realization he knew, without doubt, that he had found the purest heart he would ever know, a heart that had changed his life, his perspective, and the way he saw the world forever.